Hello, my name's Bill Johnson and I am the office manager of Willamette Writers. And what I'd like to do in this short video is talk about the novel Twilight by Stephanie Myers and what the preface of this novel did to engage the attention of readers and to begin to lead them to want to turn that page, that first page, and read chapter 1. So as a teacher, what I've often found is that many writers are what I call blind imitators. They've read books on writing, they've taken classes on writing, but they've been taught that writing is about describing things. And I teach people that writing is about evoking a story's promise, and then begin raising questions in those first sentences that pull the reader in. So what I like to do is break down those sentences, and in a class I'd also ask students to break them down. So I'm going to go through that process with the opening page of Twilight to demonstrate how this novel began to pull its readers in. First sentence. I'd never given much thought to how I would die, though I'd had reason enough in the last few months. But even if I had, I would not have imagined it like this. So in this first sentence, you have a narrator, and a narrator who's facing death, so that immediately raises a question. Who's going to kill the narrator? What's the situation? Why did the narrator feel that she had reasons to want to die or was facing death? And also that she could never have imagined her death being like this. So all of those questions operate to pull the reader forward to the next sentence. And that is the prime duty of the first sentence of a story, is it compels the reader to read the second sentence. Because if you don't do that, the risk is that you're not telling a story so much as introducing your characters, describing them, describing a situation, describing an environment, and it's down the road somewhere that the story actually starts, that there's just forward movement. But anyone reading this, or an agent or an editor reading this first sentence, would go, yes, this is a storyteller, this is a story. Second sentence, which is also the second paragraph. I stared without breathing across the long room into the dark eyes of the hunter, and he looked pleasantly back at me. Now, you get an answer, you get the beginning of an answer to a question, how is the narrator facing death? Well, it's from a character called the hunter. Now, I call this process question, answer, question. So in answer to the question, how is the narrator facing death? Well, it's through someone called the hunter. But now the next question is, who's the hunter? And a further question is, why is this hunter that's going to kill the narrator looking back so pleasantly? Why is this person in such a calm state? Third sentence. Surely it was a good way to die in the place of someone else, someone I loved. Noble even. That ought to count for something. Now, what this novel is about, as a story, is about sacrifice. So for this narrator to say, to die in place of someone else, she's talking about self-sacrifice. That identifies the promise of the story. So what happens when you start getting details about the narrator, particularly in the first chapter, they now have a context. And when you meet the other characters are also dealing with the issue of sacrifice. So some of the questions here are, what makes her impending death noble? And when she says that ought to count for something, why has she been keeping score of kind of what she owes in life, what the value of her life is? And to get the answer to those questions, you have to keep reading. Again, you're getting answers, but the questions just compel you to keep reading. Continuing, I knew that if I'd never gone to Forks, I wouldn't be facing death now. But terrified as I was, I couldn't bring myself to regret the decision. When life offers you a dream so far beyond any of your expectations, it's not reasonable to grieve when it comes to an end. So this begins to answer that question, where is this story happening? Well, it's happening in a place called Forks. But you see, the answer to that question simply raises another question. Where's Forks? Why does it have such a funny name? And it also ties into that issue of self-sacrifice. If I'd never gone to Forks, you have to read the first chapter to find out why she made that decision. And also, there's a question here, why doesn't she regret this decision to move there? If it's going to lead to her death, why does she regret that decision? So again, to get those answers, you're going to have to turn the page to read chapter 1. So the last sentence of the preface is, "The hunter smiled in a friendly way as he sauntered forward to kill me." And so many questions here. Does the narrator survive? And another question here again is, why is the hunter so relaxed about this? And again, to begin to get the answers, you have to turn the page. Now, again, this is Stephenie Meyer's Twilight. And it's interesting if you go to watch the movie that's out now, what this preface does is it hides the identity of the narrator. So even though when we turn to the first page of chapter 1, and the story is narrated by a girl named Bells, we can't be sure that she's the narrator of the preface. We can't be sure that she's the one that faces death. It's likely, but so in the movie, they can't really use this opening preface, all of it, because the preface works in part by hiding the identity of the narrator. So what they do in the movie is they use some of the language from the preface in what they call a voiceover, where you can hear what the character Bells is thinking. The problem in the movie, and it's interesting that the movie has gotten mixed reviews, what the book does in this preface is introduce the promise of the story and Belle's narrative tension around this choice that she's made, this choice of self-sacrifice that's going to lead to her death. So that really introduces the promise of the story and Belle's narrative tension around these choices that she's made. The movie does not do as good a job as communicating that. So the movie doesn't do a good job of introducing the promise of the story and this narrative tension that Bells experiences that comes out because the novel can be interior to her consciousness. So the movie's okay. I mean, the movie's like a recreation of the book. Here's what Forks looks like. Here's what, Edward looks like. But it doesn't do as good of job as getting into that tension that Bells experiences and allowing us to share it. And that's what a good story does. It makes that character's journey accessible to us as the readers. And Twilight does a very good job of that. Again, the reason I do this is because I found as a teacher that many of the writers I work with are what I call blind imitators. They think they're doing what Stephenie Meyer's doing, or Stephen King, or pick the author, whether it's literary fiction genre, but they're not. And so when I ask people, like, what's the point of this first sentence, they're not necessarily going to have they're not going to have an answer. So what I teach people to do is what I call become consciously aware of the mechanics of telling a story. And I do that in part by breaking down the opening to a novel like Twilight. I've broken down the openings to many novels, movies, books, and plays at my website at www.storyaspromised.com. And this is a journey that I share because I was once an intuitive writer, just couldn't get beyond a certain level. And so for me to have not just more success as a writer, but just a stronger feeling that I was telling the story that I wanted to tell in a powerful way, I had to learn these mechanics myself. So again, it's a journey that we share, and I welcome you to share it with me if you'd like to go to my website or just respond to this video.